Greetings, everyone. Damien Dumar here, publisher of The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars, available on Amazon in audiobook format, in physical format, and in digital format. So the news has been very exciting lately, for lack of a better word, lots of drama. Someone tried to take a shot at Donald Trump. This is unfortunate because now the chances of him being elected president are even higher. And should he somehow lose the election, this will just pretty much guarantee a civil war. Had the shooter not missed, we would have a civil war right now. So all of these scenarios are not ideal. An ideal scenario is the general public votes against Trump with such a wide margin that there is no room in which to claim that there's been any sort of election fraud. So we see, for example, a massive spread in the popular vote against Trump. That's really the ideal outcome. So what I plan to do, given that we have basically 4 months until he pretty much gets elected, I'm going to focus on what's most important, which is the Project 2025 agenda that is promoted by the Heritage Foundation and which Trump is backing. Now, recently, Trump has denied any knowledge of Project 2025. And as we explore the 800 plus page document itself over a series of podcasts, we will see that this is in fact not the case at all. There are also quotes and articles online of other people who have debunked this claim, one of the many lies of Donald Trump, that he knows nothing about Project 2025. And sometimes people say to me, what's the big deal voting for Trump as opposed to Biden? I think that probably the most important practical consideration here is that if you vote for Biden, he won't be there forever. Whereas with Trump, if you vote for Trump, he's never going to leave. It's going to be the end of democracy as we know it, or representative democracy as we know it. We're going to be living in a sort of dictatorship, a Christian fascist dictatorship, a theocracy, which goes against the Constitution. Really what people need to become expert on is the information that is in Project 2025. After all, nobody really read Hitler's Mein Kampf. And then when Hitler did what he did, people acted shocked and surprised. Well, he told everyone what he was going to do. So in this case here, Project 2025 outlines what is going to be done should Trump become elected president, which at this point seems almost inevitable. But the best strategy at this point is literally to go over the document itself, because it won't be my words. It's going to be the words of the authors and contributors who created Project 2025. Let's look at what they have to say. So listening to my podcast over the next couple of episodes, you will become an expert on the material that's in Project 2025. You won't have to read the 800 plus page document, because I'm going to read it for you. I'm going to highlight key sections and point them out to you, and then you can make up your own mind. So let's begin. Before I begin, I do want to point out one of many articles here. This is one entitled Anti-Trump GOP Group Posts Video of him, meaning Donald Trump, praising Project 2025 authors after his latest denial. Of course, we know that every time Trump opens his mouth, a lie comes out of it. This is just one of them. Donald Trump's famous quote was, quote, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have not seen it, have no idea who is in charge of it, and unlike our very well-received Republican platform, had nothing to do with it," end quote. This is, of course, all not true, but let's not spend any more time on that. Let's look at Project 2025 itself. So here I have the 922 page PDF. When I say 800 plus pages, actually 922 pages, called The Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise 2025, Project 2025. So here's the document itself. You can download it from the Heritage Foundation and other sources online. They are not making any secret about what the agenda is. They probably imagine most people will not read a 922-page document. I will, all in the name of content. Let's take a look at it. So we're going to go digestible chunk by digestible chunk. So as we scroll through the document here, we can see the table of contents with such titles as Section 1, Taking the Reins of Government. Section 2, The Common Defense. Section 3, The General Welfare. And Section 4, The Economy. Section 5, Independent Regulatory Agencies. And what this basically outlines is, in all these areas, the sweeping changes that the conservative Christian right plans to implement within the very first few days of Trump's election into office, and all the changes they plan to make. They're all outlined here. No one can say they didn't know, especially with major news outlets now picking up finally on Project 2025 and talking about it. So if you want to know what the true platform is of Donald Trump, it's all laid out here in 922 pages. Not my words, the words of the Mandate for Leadership, the words of the Heritage Foundation. Let's go a little bit further into this document here. We have our acknowledgments by the main authors. And here we have the Project 2025 Advisory Board. It's massive. Look at all these institutes: Alabama Policy Institute, American Cornerstone Institute, American Accountability Foundation, Claremont Institute, Keystone Policy, James Madison Institute, Recovery for America Now Foundation. Who's funding all these institutions? There are people working full-time jobs at these institutions. Someone's funding them. Interesting. These projects just don't amount out of nowhere. This is the culmination of over 40 years worth of work, as the authors of this project openly admit. Now we begin the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. So here it says, the 2025 Presidential Transition Project is the conservative movement's unified effort to be ready for the next conservative administration to govern at 12 noon, January 20th, 2025. History teaches that a president's power to implement an agenda is at its apex during the administration's opening days. To execute requires a well-conceived, coordinated, unified plan and a trained and committed cadre of personnel to implement it. It's not 1980. In 2023, the game has changed. The federal government is a behemoth, weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, with freedom and liberty under siege as never before. Our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state. At this point, I want to talk about this idea of the long march of cultural Marxism. Now, that's something which really can't be denied, because when you look around, there is clearly a lot of cultural Marxist influence on society, and one can easily make the argument that we have been marched into a direction that would be considered culturally Marxist. Here's what one has to realize. Those are familiar with the works of David Icke understand that there is the idea of a problem, reaction, solution. In other words, what that means is that if I wish to sell you on a solution, the easiest thing to do is create a problem to which the solution I want to sell you is the solution. And then you're more inclined to go with the solution without me having to sell you on it. A simple example of this would be, if you look at a city like New York City has this insane crime problem, out of control crime problem. Now, one would have to ask themselves, why would New York City, which at one point had probably the most powerful and biggest police force in the United States, if not the world, how would they suddenly develop a crime problem? If New York City has some of the most advanced surveillance technology and facial recognition cameras everywhere, why is there an incredible crime problem? One possible explanation for it would be that if you wish to bring down draconian measures of control over people, such as they have in China, where they have not only facial recognition cameras, but gait motion cameras that identify you based on the way you walk, because that is even more unique to a person and even harder to fake. If you wanted to unveil such a system, people might balk against it, you'd think. One way to get people to accept this is to create a massive crime problem. You simply say, there's no more bail from now on. We're going to put in prosecutors, which George Soros did with his funding, prosecutors such as Alvin Bragg, who decide that they will not prosecute criminals at all. They won't do it. They will prosecute people who try to defend themselves from criminals. They will create a situation that is so bad that people will then cry out for something to be done. And that's when they can freely roll out the surveillance state, the police state, and you can't complain because you asked for it. So this is generally the strategy, because as much as I talk about Trump, I don't talk that much about Biden. Is it because I think that Biden is somehow awesome? No, not at all. All political candidates are part of the same problem. They're all under control of extraterrestrials. Ultimately, they're all on the same team in the sense that they are going to bat for your enslavement and destruction. So to get caught up in left versus is really an exercise in foolishness. And someone would say, why is it then that you beat on Trump so much? The reason why is because within the context of what is going to happen, which is laid out for you in The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars, the vote for Donald Trump accelerates what is to come, whereas a vote for Biden, it delays it. It's delaying the inevitable, but it's still a delay. So if you vote for Trump, you're voting for an acceleration. It's not because not voting for Trump is going to save you. It's just going to delay the inevitable. So this is the problem here. So when we look at Republicans and Democrats, and we look at the problem of what is referenced many times in Project 2025, which is this idea of cultural Marxism that is beginning to take over the country and be a threat to democracy and destroy the Constitution, there are two things that one has to bring up in light of that. One of them is, how is a Christian fascist theocracy not an affront to the Constitution as well? And also, considering that both political parties are really all working for Satan's agenda, does it not dawn on people that the pushing of cultural Marxism is just to get people upset enough to then vote for Trump and to vote a Christian fascist theocracy into power? If there was no cultural Marxism, who would vote for a candidate like Trump? Who would vote for a conservative fascist Christian theocracy? Nobody would do that. But if you create a situation through the promulgation of cultural Marxism where people get so angry that they figure they have to strike out, given how lazy people are and how most people are not going to band together and work for 40 years to create their own Project 2025, which would be in their benefit. No, they're lazy. They do the easiest thing. They vote for whatever's presented to them. Oh, you're angry? Here's a gun. Go do something with it. So in this case, you're angry at cultural Marxism. You're angry at what's around you. Oh, here's Trump. Vote for Trump. And that's what they want you to do all along. So again, it goes back to what David Icke was promoting for years, the idea of problem, reaction, solution. And we see this same dynamic playing out in the presidency. We see the same dynamic playing out in New York City. You have to say to yourself, are the leaders of New York City, for example, insane? with their policies. Why would they want to destroy the city? No, they don't want to destroy the city. They just want people to cry out for a totalitarian state. And it's the same thing on the federal level. They want people to cry out and vote for Trump. They put a Christian fascist theocracy in place of a constitutional representative democracy. And this is what people need to understand. But they get so caught up in left versus right, and they miss the point. They don't realize they're being manipulated. So it's important to keep this in mind, that all of the political apparatus is under the control of Satan, just like all religions are under the control of Satan. If you want to be spiritual and have a relationship with your Creator, the Divine Father, just reach out to Him. Don't go through a religion, because that's like going to Satan to establish a relationship with your Creator. It doesn't make any sense. I know nobody wants to hear this. My TikTok account just got permanently banned talking about this, getting millions of views every few days. Gets shut down. They don't like it. A lot of people don't like to hear that. They don't want to hear that their religion is really under the influence of Satan. They don't want to hear that. But these are facts. So this is something to keep in mind going forward, because as I read this document, there are a lot of things out there which may strike a chord in people. People may hear and go, oh yeah, I don't like these cultural Marxist ideas. And you have to remember that cultural Marxism was put forward just to get you to the place you are now, so you can vote for what will end up being your own destruction. Because nobody can sit here and tell me that fascism is somehow better than communism. Fascism and communism are really two sides of the same tyrannical coin. They have nothing to do with what America is supposed to be about. They have nothing to do with the Constitution. They have nothing to do with democracy, and they have nothing to do with your best interests. I wanted to point this out before I read any further, because Project 2025 is a piece of propaganda as well as a roadmap telling you what they plan to do. And it's important not to get sucked into the propaganda, which so many people do. Every time I talk to someone and they start talking about Trump and how they're going to vote for him and how great Trump is, I always point out certain things to them about Trump, which are very bad. And the response is 99% of the time the same. I agree with you, that's true, but I'm voting for him anyway. I say, why? And the answer is, because I want to stick it to the system. I'm sick of this system. I want to burn it to the ground. This is how people view things. They view a vote for Trump as a vote against a system which they are completely frustrated with. But again, if one is so frustrated with the system, why doesn't one get together with other people who are frustrated and make changes? No, it's always the lazy way out. Oh, let me vote for Trump, the savior. If it's not Jesus the savior, it's Trump the savior. And there are no saviors. You have to do the work. There's no way out of it. Let's look at some of the authors of this project. There are quite a few. And the response to Trump saying that he's never heard of Project 2025, here we have Jonathan Barry, one of the authors. He was the nomination of Justice Neil Gorsuch and dozens of other judges. He previously served as chief counsel for the Trump transition and earlier clerked for Associate Justice Samuel Alito and Judge Jerry Smith of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Adam Kandube, he served as acting Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Deputy Associate Attorney General at the Justice Department during the Trump administration. Dustin J. Carmack. So he actually served with Congressman Ron DeSantis. So while he didn't work on Trump's campaign, he worked with Ron DeSantis, who was another individual who was completely behind Project 2025. So I threw him in there as a bonus. Here we have Ken Cuccinelli, served as acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in 2019, and then from November 2019 through the end of the Trump administration as acting deputy secretary for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Rick Dearborn served as executive director of the 2016 President-elect Donald Trump transition team. Mandy M. Gunasekara. During the Trump administration, Mandy served as the chief of staff at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as well as principal deputy assistant administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation. Dennis Dean Kirk. During the Trump administration, Dennis served in senior positions at the Office of Personnel Management and was nominated by President Trump to be chairman of the Merit Systems Protection Board. Christopher Miller served in several positions during the Trump administration, including as acting U.S. Secretary of Defense, Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, and Senior Director for Counterterrorism and Transitional Threats at the National Security Council. Maura Namdar was appointed by President Donald Trump to perform the duties of the Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs. Peter Navarro served with Donald Trump from the 2016 campaign to the end of the president's first term. He was the West Wing's chief China hawk and trade czar and served as director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy and Defense Production Act Policy Coordinator. His top-rated Taking Back Trump's America podcast appears on Apple Podcasts and Google. He also wrote a bunch of books. William Perry Pendley, leader of the Bureau of Land Management for President Donald Trump. Brooks D. Tucker, acting chief of staff from 2020 to 2021. He helped to craft the policy framework for President-elect Trump's transition team and served as the senior policy advisor for national security and veterans affairs to Senator Richard Burr from 2010 to 2015. Hans A. von Spakovsky. He is a former member of President Donald Trump's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. Russ Vaught served in President Trump's cabinet as director of the Office of Management and Budget, where he oversaw the implementation of the presidential budget, key policies on deregulation, and a landmark effort to eliminate critical race theory and other radical ideologies in executive agencies. William I. Walton served as President-elect Donald Trump's transition team as agency action leader for all the federal economic agencies. Paul Winfrey served in both the Biden and Trump administrations for 3 terms as the chair of the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board that oversees the Fulbright program and educational exchanges sponsored by the Department of State. Now let's look at the editors. Paul Dans served in the Trump administration as chief of staff at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, as OPM's White House liaison, and as a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Finally, Stephen Groves served in the Trump administration first as Ambassador Nikki Haley's chief of staff at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. He later joined the White House as assistant special counsel, representing the White House in the Mueller investigation. He also served as White House deputy press secretary. When Donald Trump says he has no idea what Project 2025 is, knows nothing about it, has nothing to do with it, he is lying. Not my words, not the words of some article. It's the words of the authors and editors of Project 2025 itself that show that he is a liar. Now we have contributors. We have a lot of contributors. Again, all of them working for institutes and foundations, and many contributors. Look at this. 5 pages, 6 pages, 7 pages, 7 pages of contributors. And you can see all the foundations they're from. This is a massive movement. Don't think it isn't. And these people aren't nobodies. They all have advanced degrees and have worked in all kinds of capacities, and they all have one agenda. Now let's look at the foreword, A Promise to America. And again, I've highlighted that which I consider most important or most comment worthy. If someone wants to go deeper into it, you're free to download it and read it. It's free, but most people probably won't. So let me read it for you. Inflation is ravaging family budgets, drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Okay, let's take a look at this statement. Inflation is indeed ravaging family budgets. Drug overdose deaths continue to escalate. Okay. Here's the thing. Is pornography actually invading our schools' libraries? I haven't been in any school libraries in many years. Somehow, I don't think that school libraries are filled with pornography. I just don't think that is the case. It just doesn't make any sense to me, but it sounds very good to get people incensed. The idea that pornography is invading their school libraries. And here's another comment. Students of history, as he pointed out, will demonstrate that a lot of this is conservative fantasy. This idea that somehow Ronald Reagan was the savior of America. Again, Ronald Reagan being an actor. You see the parallels between Reagan and Trump? Trump is basically an actor, a reality television star, not a successful businessman. One can find quotes of Bloomberg speaking where he talks about this. Donald Trump is essentially an actor, much like Ronald Reagan. And they tried to frame Trump in the same image as Ronald Reagan. They try to make him into the reincarnation of George Washington, Jesus Christ, Ronald Reagan. Again, this idea of a savior. Ronald Reagan was no savior. He was just an actor who was at Bohemian Grove. There are pictures of this as evidence. One can find them online. And he was selected to fill this role. And now that Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt, it again frames him in the same light as Ronald Reagan, who also survived an assassination attempt. See, he's the next Ronald Reagan. That's how it goes. This idea that the 1970s had all of this radical chic and feminism, and Ronald Reagan somehow saved us from it. This is just nostalgic delusion at its best. And here it says, the Heritage Foundation, which are the authors, again, of Project 2025, Mandate for Leadership, they write that the Heritage Foundation is proud to have played a small but pivotal role in that story, which shows you how old this Project 2025 is and how long it's been in the works. Just like prior podcasts I've done on some of Lucy and Mars' articles that were on vampireashram.com and republished on thelastharvest.info, where you can see that the planning, for example, in the streets of Washington, D.C., that form the Star of David, you can see how far ahead the elite and the extraterrestrials behind them plan things out. 40 years is really nothing, but still, you can see that Heritage Foundation didn't come about yesterday. So then they say, it was in early 1979, amid stagflation, gas lines, and the Red Army's invasion of Afghanistan, the nadir of Jimmy Carter's days of malaise, that Heritage launched the Mandate for Leadership project. We brought together hundreds of conservative scholars and academics across the conservative movement. Together, this team created a 20-volume, 3,000-page governing handbook containing more than 2,000 conservative policies to reform the federal government and rescue the American people from Washington dysfunction. It was a promise from the conservative movement to the country, confident, specific, and clear. Mandate for Leadership was published in January 1981, the same month Ronald Reagan was sworn into his presidency. Okay, just to give you some background, someone who wishes to be a student of history can go look into this and see how much of it is true, how much of it is false. Again, my view on this, having been alive through all of this time, is that this is nostalgic fantasy, that Ronald Reagan was nothing more than an actor. That's a fact. And ultimately, nothing special happened during those days. Now, the authors of Project 2025 say that there are 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. Number 1, restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Don't sound too bad. 2, dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Again, doesn't sound so bad, but as we continue through episodes of this podcast to go over what is actually in this document, we're going to come back and look. Are they actually going to be returning self-governance to the American people? Or are they just creating a dictatorship, a Christian fascist theocracy? So number 2 is highly questionable. Next, number 3, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. Okay, on the surface, it doesn't sound too bad, given the United States' tendency to meddle into affairs of foreign countries. Not really quite sure. Okay, now here's where it gets problematic and foreshadows what's to come. Number 4, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. Starting to get a little bit theocratic here, a little bit religious. They don't exactly define what, quote, the blessings of liberty, end quote, are. Again, I don't want to get bogged down in this too much. As we proceed through this 922-page document over the course of several podcasts, we will see what this is really all about. But these are just the highlights, things to keep in mind. Next, in 1979, the threats we faced were the Soviet Union, the socialism of 1970s liberals, and the predatory deviancy of cultural elites. Interesting when there are photos out there of Ronald Reagan at Bohemian Grove. So when you want to talk about predatory deviancy, I guess that would include him, correct? Oh no, but Reagan defeated these beasts. He did? No, he didn't. I was alive then. Didn't happen. By ignoring their tentacles and striking instead at their hearts. How did he do that? His approach to the Cold War, quote, we win and they lose, end quote. His economic agenda? The human dignity of work and its many rewards. His platform in the culture wars? The, quote, community of values embodied in these words, family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom, end quote. Again, there's no facts in here, nothing factual about how Ronald Reagan actually defeated the Soviet Union. I don't believe he defeated the Soviet Union. Is there any evidence that he did that? No. Is there any evidence that he defeated the socialism of 1970s if the problem has only gotten worse to the degree that people are now willing to vote like for someone like Trump? If the number one problem in this country is cultural Marxism, then Reagan clearly didn't defeat it in the 1970s, because if he defeated it, it would never come back. So that's strange. And again, how could he have defeated the predatory deviancy of cultural elites when he himself was a part of it? I don't understand this. And he did so by ignoring their tentacles and instead striking at their hearts. How did he do that? By saying that we'll win the Cold War and they lose? How did anyone win the Cold War? Both sides have enough nukes to probably wipe out several Earth's economic agenda, the human dignity of work and its many rewards. Then the authors of Project 2025 go on to say this book and Project 2025 as a whole will arm the next conservative president with the same kind of strategic clarity, but for a new age. Oh, I would be a little nervous that. What is this new age they talk about? Is it the age of Satan's return on September 20th, 2025? We'll see about that. It's when someone starts talking about a new age, you get uncomfortable. Something's up. Something's not right here. Let's look at promise number 1. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect their children. They say something here very important. It says, There is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. That is correct. However, as one reads through the rest of this, one sees that authors of Project 2025 miss out on what the real root cause of the absence of a father was, and that was the creation of no-fault divorce. So when I was a child is when no-fault divorce was first instituted, and I remember when I was very young already, so many children around me suddenly started ending up as victims of divorce. No one was divorcing prior to that, and suddenly everyone around me, it seemed, was getting divorced, and most of my friends, their parents were divorcing. It was like this epidemic, and that's where the term latchkey children comes from, because child would come home and be living with one parent who was working, and child would have to let himself into the house on his own. There's no one to open the door for him. I remember very specifically that this was very traumatic for every child I knew, every friend of mine. It was very traumatic to have the parents divorce like this. And I can only say that now, after generations of children traumatized through divorce have been having children themselves, that this generational trauma has no doubt contributed to a lot of the disintegration in family structure that these conservatives are talking about, yet they never mention this no-fault divorce idea, and how it contributed to the idea of there not being a father. Fathers don't just randomly get up and leave. In most situations, divorce rate's very high. So this is why there are no fathers around. They seem to avoid talking about that. And as we go through this document, we'll see that many roots of problems are glossed over. And this is an alarming trend in this document. Here we get to something interesting. Quote, pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders, and telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. The first problem here is in the first sentence, it says, pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children. This is very convoluted and dangerous. You're talking about pornography, but then you're basically defining pornography as the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children. Child pornography is not legal. If you produce it, traffic it, consume it, you're headed for prison, assuming you're caught. Lumping it all together when these are not comparable baskets. And then they also throw in this defining pornography as the propagation of transgender ideology. Pornography is not manifesting today as the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology. The subjects of pornography, transgender ideology, and child pornography are three completely different baskets that are just thrown together to steamroll people and get them riled up, and they can't be lumped together. And then say, well, it has no claim to First Amendment protection. Okay, child pornography doesn't have a claim to First Amendment protection, but transgender ideology has claim to First Amendment protection. just as any other ideology has such protection. And to say that it's purveyors or child predators, so everyone who produces pornography is a child predator, how is that the case? Unless they're shooting child pornography, they're not a child predator.